Senator Kennedy, one other point I would like to make on those first two nominations. After we had an open opportunity for debate in the committee, and it did have a roll call, something occurred which was news to me. Have you ever voted proxy in a committee and then arrived a few minutes later and said, I want to be recorded as voting present? And with unanimous consent, there's never been an objection. There was an objection from the Republican side of the aisle to the parliamentarian. That's why we had to take an additional roll call vote on the first two nominees. So it wasn't just a happenstance. It was a circumstance that was created beyond our control. And
Mr. Chairman,
I understand, Dick, or Mr. Chairman, but I'd like you to consider this. I don't understand why you're taking this new approach. I enjoy working. I enjoy this committee. We all take our responsibility seriously. I can only speak for me. I try to be fair-minded. I voted for a number of President Biden's nominees when I think they're qualified. And I try to ask substantive questions. I did the same thing with President Trump's nominees. In fact, we killed 5 of President Trump's nominees because we killed them dead as 4 o'clock because it was apparent after questioning them that they didn't know a law book from a Sears Roebuck catalog. And we killed them. And I think we, on our side of the aisle, my side of the aisle, have voted for more of President Biden's nominees than my Democratic colleagues have voted for President Trump's nominees. No, that's okay. Everybody has one vote, and they have the right to exercise. I know you don't like some of my questions. I get that. And some of your comments have been borderline snarky, but I ignore them. When my son was going through puberty, he used to make those comments, and I learned, it's the best thing to do is just ignore him. But I just don't understand why you're taking us down this road. I don't. The last time we met, you preached cooperation, and I think we've been cooperating. I think we confirmed more Louisiana nominees than just about any other state. There were some people who were not here at the last hearing that would like to speak on, and would have liked to speak on Mr. Khashoggi. I did speak, and I'm willing to waive my right to speak again. But this is a gentleman who said that he believes that when race is an issue in a case, that he has the right to ignore precedent in the federal rules of evidence and the federal rules of civil procedure and apply a new standard of proof. Now, some people find that objectionable. I do. And I think folks should have had the right to weigh in on it. And I confess, I don't understand why you're taking us down this road. I don't. And the final point I guess I would make is that I asked you this question last time, and I think if where you're headed with this is to ultimately subpoena Justice Thomas or another member of the Supreme Court, I think that would be a huge mistake. But if that's where we're going to go with this, I respectfully suggest you go ahead and do it and let us meet it head on, because that looks to me like where it's headed. And I think it will provoke a constitutional crisis, and let's just go ahead and meet it head on. So thank you for the chance to respond, Mr. Chair.
Else wish to speak on this nomination?
Mr. Chairman, for the record, it wasn't some esoteric rule. You didn't have a majority present the last time we voted on these judges. That's a widely known rule. It's not some obscure technicality. Incompetence on your part does not override the prerogatives of senators on our part.
Never been an objection.
It's the first time, Senator Cotton, that there's ever been an objection when a proxy vote has to be recorded as a vote present, physically present. And I just say all of us, because of our schedules, face this all of the time. And this is the first time I've seen it in the time that I've served in the United States
And the
Senate.
parliamentarian ruled against you. And it looks like Senator Graham has something to say.
Yeah, I do.
Do you recognize Senator Graham?
He can take the rest of my time if he wants it.
Yeah, so here's the deal. These two nominees are like historically bad. I would do anything I could to keep them off the bench. But in terms of what the parliamentarian ruled, she did it. And here we are. There are rules. But the point I'm trying to make, Mr. Chairman, is that the consequences of this to the committee are just far outweigh, I think, any benefit. Because I don't believe your side when you say you're not out to get the court. If it really were about fixing the ethics problems of the court as you see them, why haven't we taken up the legislation the committee passed? Why can't you get Senator Schumer to bring the bill up that supposedly fixes this? It's never going to be brought up. You know why it's not going to be brought up? Because it's not going to pass. It's unconstitutional. It's a bad idea. So I'm going to keep making that point. I don't buy what you're saying. If this really were the issue you claim it to be, then we will have voted on the bill passed by this committee a long time ago. We're never going to vote on that bill, folks. It's all political theater at the expense of this committee. You've made a choice. Accept the consequences.
On favorably reporting the nomination of Seth Robert A. Frame to be U.S. Circuit Judge for the First Circuit, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Serrano. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Ayes are 11, the nays are 10.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Up next is Judge Edward Keel, nominated to the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on this nomination? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Serrano. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Welch. Ms. Butler. Mr. Graham.
No.
Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Cornick.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kennedy.
No.
Mr. Tillis. Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 11, the nays are 10.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Up next is Sarah Russell, nominated to the U.S. District Court for the District of Connecticut. Does anyone seek recognition? Senator Lee is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I've got some concerns with regard to this nominee. He's made some statements that I think are incompatible with someone wanting to serve as a life-tenured Article III federal judge. During the height of COVID, one of my many concerns relates to a letter that she signed on to. A letter that reflects a certain betrayal, in turn reflecting a lack of judicial temperament. The letter that she signed on to is captioned, "Urgent action needed to protect individuals in Connecticut's prisons and jails from coronavirus 19. It called out on the governor of the state of Connecticut and all Connecticut jurisdictions to Number one, immediately release to the maximum extent possible. This is a quote here. People incarcerated pre-trial and post-conviction. Also said that, even post-conviction, the governor should release as many people incarcerated post-conviction as possible, including but not limited to all people over the age of 55. And by that standard, if that somehow entitles you to compassionate release, nearly every committee member here would be subject to that. And it doesn't seem that old to me. Individuals who have uncontrolled diabetes, respiratory conditions, and or immunocompromised, and all people who are eligible for parole and community supervision or release, or who are currently incarcerated for technical parole or probation violations. In addition, it argued that the state should declare a moratorium on incarceration, a complete moratorium, and urged the governor to issue an executive order directing the state's attorney and law enforcement entities, including town and city departments and so forth, to immediately cease adding to the incarcerated population, given the high risk of infection posed by population increase, both to those already incarcerated and to those entering correctional facilities. So in other words, they're basically declaring a sort of an incarceration holiday. You think of the message that sent at the time. You commit a crime in the state of Connecticut, you're just not going to be thrown in prison. Why? Well, because COVID. And then it also asked for policing, for all policing and arrest practices to be changed in order to reflect the moratorium on incarceration. Now, these are not my words, these are the words of the letter. A moratorium on incarceration. Think about what that means. Reminds me of the scene in the movie Lion King, when they're talking about the fact that there would be no king and the absolute anarchy would prevail. For instance, best practices across the medical field in times of crisis recommend stockpiling at least 2 weeks and 3 months of supplies. And so they were going to have all of these policing policies changed to that extent. Harm reduction organizations are globally advocating that people dependent on substances also ensure they have accessible several weeks supply to prevent potentially severe effects of withdrawal at a time with even less capacity for adequate treatment. Suggests to me that I don't know whether she's suggesting keeping people doped up so that they don't have to detox if they're incarcerated at the time, or not incarcerating them at all. But again, when you're declaring a moratorium on incarceration, that seems to be what they're suggesting. In those circumstances, is it appropriate? You can't think of a circumstance, even at the worst time of panic during COVID, when people committed to the rule of law thought that it was important not to make arrests or to sentence people to prison, send them to jail or to prison as a precaution against COVID. People who commit criminal acts should never receive the message that there's going to be no consequence. And I think someone who has reflected that kind of profound lack of judgment by signing on to a letter like this, a letter that I would add, if I'm not mistaken, was not properly disclosed to the committee on the nominee's part. We've got a major concern with this nominee, and I can't support this nominee's confirmation.
Anyone else
Chairman?
seek recognition? Senator Kennedy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Russell sent a letter to the governor of Connecticut during the pandemic. Here's what she said, quote, "As they stand, prisons and jails are detrimental to public health and human rights and disproportionately harm marginalized communities, including Black, brown, indigenous and other communities of color, immigrants, people with mental illness, people with disabilities, people in the LGBTQ plus community, people who use drugs, people engaged in sex work and street economies, and people experiencing houselessness and poverty. Then she went on to request the governor to immediately release everybody in jail in Connecticut. It's unclear to me whether she was talking about just during the pandemic or on a permanent basis. Then she goes on to tell the governor of Connecticut to stop putting people in jail. And it's still unclear to me whether she meant just for the duration of the pandemic or on an extended basis. And on top of all of that, the cherry on top, she didn't turn the letter over to the committee. I don't know why she didn't. Perhaps she thought, I'm not saying this is the case, she thought we wouldn't find it. It took about 7.3 minutes on Google to find it. Now, this is America. Ms. Russell has a constitutional right to believe in these things and to say those things. She does not have a constitutional right to be a federal judge. And she's not qualified to be a federal judge if those are her beliefs. How can she possibly, how can any criminal defendant in front of her or any prosecutor in front of her think that they're getting a fair shake in light of this letter when she sentences someone to prison, if she ever does sentence someone to prison? It's just simply breathtaking. And for that reason, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be voting no.
Mr.
Anyone
Chairman.
else seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blumenthal?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank my colleagues on the other side for those comments, which really don't call into question the fundamental credentials and qualifications of this nominee, which are extraordinary. As to the letter, Senator Kennedy, those are not her beliefs. In fact, in response to questions raised during her hearing, she stated in a supplemental statement, and I'm going to quote her, "The letter does not accurately reflect my views. In particular, the letter's suggestions were overbroad and failed to make expressly clear that all decisions about whether to incarcerate people and whether to release people who are already incarcerated must be conducted in a manner consistent with the law and public safety of people and communities." She goes on to cite the specific statutes that would have to be followed by her as a district judge in sentencing or in releasing someone. And she also expresses regret for failing to submit that letter, acknowledging that it should have been. She made a mistake, and she acknowledges it. I think that the views expressed in that letter, which was signed by hundreds, it was a mass letter, not written by her alone. She has, in effect, disowned, saying that they are stated too broadly. And I would urge my colleagues to look to the qualifications of this nominee, which are extraordinarily
Would the
distinguished.
senator yield for a question?
Chairman, my name was invoked. Can I respond just quickly?
Senator Kennedy?
I appreciate Senator Blumenthal's comments. But, Richard, here's how I see it. She got caught. She got caught. She had an epiphany once she got caught. And I am looking at her qualifications, and I am looking at her record. And I don't know that she didn't help write this letter. I know she signed it. And I know she tried to hide it from this committee. So even if you agree with her that we should stop, that actions have no consequences, and that nobody's ever responsible anymore, and it's always somebody else's fault when a criminal sodomizes a young girl, and everybody ought to get a trophy. I mean, I wish we lived in a world like that, but that's what she believes. And you know it, and I know it. And she has recanted after she got caught, and she got caught because she didn't turn it over to us, for God's sakes. Senator, we had to find it on our own. Shame on her. And every single time when she has got to, on the federal bench, she has got to say, sakes, and does the rule of law mean nothing?
Does Senator yield for a question?
Certainly I do, Senator, and I apologize for not yielding.
No, that's
Senator.
Chair recognizes Senator Cornyn.
Thank you for yielding for the question. Is the senator from Louisiana familiar with a concept called confirmation conversion? Kind of like a death
I would like to hear more about it, Senator.
Well, I'd just be interested, how can you reconcile the letter with what Senator Blumenthal, the senator from Connecticut, read as her disavowal of the letter? Did she express regret, or that she had misspoken, or that she now, on second thought, had different ideas? I'm trying to get my head around how do you reconcile this letter that you read from the statement that the senator from Connecticut.
Well, Senator, here's how I reconcile it. 3 words. She got caught. She got caught. And we found the letter. And she didn't turn it over. And during committee, instead of saying, yeah, I signed the letter and I shouldn't have done it, I don't believe that. First, she said she wasn't sure. And then she was sure. And then she didn't mean it. And then she'll make a pinky promise that she'll be a fair federal judge. These positions are for life. They're there forever. At a minimum, just because you've seen My Cousin Vinny doesn't qualify you to be on the federal bench. At a minimum, there ought to be a minimum level of integrity and a minimum level of adherence to the rule of law. And this lady sets a new standard. And I wish you didn't have to say that, but those are the facts.
Would the senator yield for one last question?
Of course.
Are you familiar with the fact that all federal judges are subject to a code of judicial conduct?
Yes, sir.
That would be all federal judges, correct?
Yes, sir.
Including members of the United States Supreme Court.
Yes, sir.
And is the senator aware of the fact that that code of judicial conduct that applies to all federal judges was actually promulgated in 1919?
Yes, sir. I understand that's the case.
And I'm trying to reconcile the chairman's statement that this code of judicial conduct that applies to the Supreme Court specifically, that was issued on November the 13th, that was the first time that members of the Supreme Court were subject to a code of judicial conduct. Isn't it the fact that the code of judicial conduct that applied to all federal judges applied to them as well?
Yes, sir.
And one of those, how can a litigant, a citizen accused of a crime, somebody who goes to court to seek vindication for a wrong done to them, how can they have any confidence whatsoever in a judge that won't tell the truth?